Hi, good morning. This is Damon Scott, Marketing Director here at PVBS. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today in our introduction to the Microsoft Dynamics NAV for government contractors. So today we're going to be providing an overview of the Microsoft Dynamics NAV for government contractors. It's a fully integrated business management solution. Some of the things we're going to take a look at: the executive dashboard, the fully integrated web time and expense system. We'll even touch into some of the project setup, and including some billing setup and managing funding. And I believe we should have time to get into invoicing and invoice formats. And again, if we have enough time, we will talk about managing indirect rates as well. So a few housekeeping things you should be aware of. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to our PVBS YouTube account, which is PVBS Dynamics NAV, later today. If you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, you can post those into the question section, and we'll try to get to those as we go along. If we cannot get to your question, we'll either try to save some time at the end, or we'll contact you separately. Also, later today, you should receive an email invitation to take a post-webinar survey. We really appreciate any feedback that you can provide. We do want to make this a great learning tool for everyone. So please take a few minutes to answer a few questions from us, and again, we appreciate that. So the agenda for today's webinar includes a brief introduction about PVBS. Then we're going to jump right into the demonstration of the product. And again, if we're able to, we'll answer questions as we go along. We certainly want to try to do that. But a little bit about PVBS. We are a top-tier Microsoft Business Solutions partner serving only the government contracting market. And our headquarters are right outside Washington, D.C. in Reston, Virginia, giving us a unique access and insight into the GovCon community. Also, as an experienced leader with over 14 years of experience in the government contracting market and an intelligent innovator with the Microsoft systems, PVBS is a direct resource to both government contractors and the Microsoft community. Microsoft Dynamics NAV for government contractors from PVBS, it's a rich, robust accounting solution compliant with federal rules and regulations. Also provides complete integration and ease of use. PVBS is driven to develop excellence in providing the most comprehensive solution to our customers and our partnership channels. And with that, I'm going to turn everything over to Mr. Paul Skerpsey, one of the founders here at PVBS and our VP of Sales and Marketing.
All right. Well, Damon, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for everybody that joined the call today. We're excited to give you an introduction into Microsoft Dynamics NAV. And I think there's some folks that are on the call that have maybe seen it before, so we're showing the NAV 2015 version, a lot of the exciting things going on with Microsoft, and really giving people some insight into why folks are switching to Microsoft Dynamics NAV. So this slide is probably about 6 months old, and just some quick updates to this. Dynamics NAV now has over 120,000 companies that run it, so it's the most widely used mid-market business software product across any vendor. I've been working with it since 1999, and back then there was probably about 20,000 companies. So you can see over 100,000 companies. Either Microsoft's having incredible growth, or I'm getting incredibly old. I'm not sure which one it is. Probably a little of both. And then there's over 2 million licensed users of the product. So Microsoft, their model is they go to market with partners, and they want partners to focus on vertical markets. So Microsoft's idea is that horizontally, they provide capabilities that are unmatched in the marketplace for mid-market companies. And what I mean by that is the aspects around financial management, the purchasing process, everything around fixed assets. So the things that are core to any company, Microsoft, they're the leader there in terms of those aspects. And then what partners do is they take it the last mile, and that's what PVBS has done, is really add to the capabilities of Dynamics NAV. And Damon had a slide earlier that said certified for Microsoft Dynamics. And what that means is that the things that we've done to improve it, we actually submit it to Microsoft, they certify it, then we incorporate it into the base system. And that's everything that we've done to improve it around government contracting. And we've had an incredible partnership with Microsoft. We're working with all the key folks within the organization to really drive not only change from a Microsoft model, but also the industry. Really coming up with something that the industry hasn't seen before. A modern solution that is backed by Microsoft that gives you the kind of capabilities you need to run your business. This is a little bit of a roadmap on Dynamics NAV. The product has been around since the late 80s. Microsoft acquired this company back in the early 2000s. And I think really the thing that I want to speak to is the investments that not only they've made in the past, but the investments they're making in the future, because I think that is a huge differentiator from the competition, is that Microsoft is investing, I think their total R&D spend is like $12 billion. And $1 billion of it is going into the Microsoft Dynamics suite, which includes all their productivity tools like Office and the such. So when you look at the NAV roadmap, and I'm going to pull up what's going on for 2016, the things that are, I think, compelling are how it integrates with Office 365. So I've seen the uptake in companies using Office 365, that's what we use today, has been incredible. And that includes Power BI, which is their business intelligence solution. The second thing is, how can you get to the system? So everybody's talking about the cloud. You can leverage Microsoft's Azure cloud to get to the application. But the type of interface you can use the full desktop interface, which I'll show you today. You can just use a straight browser. So I don't need to load any software. But the other two are a tablet client and also a phone client. So as an executive, I'm sure the things that people do is they're on the road visiting with clients a lot. And wouldn't it be great from your phone to be able to access data about your system? And that's what that phone and tablet client can allow people. And then leveraging everything around the internet, workflow, continually improving functionality of the system, and then the engineering improvements is all around how do you make it easier to upgrade. So that's a little bit about what's going on with Microsoft and PVBS in terms of our partnership with Microsoft. Now I want to hop into the software and show folks kind of, what is all the excitement about? What's going on with Microsoft Dynamics? Like Damon mentioned, the go-to meeting, the menu bar, you'll see a little question section. So if you've got a question as we go through the presentation, feel free to pop over there, ask the question. If it's something relevant to what we're doing right now, Damon will stop us and we'll answer it. Otherwise, we'll cover it at the end. So I'm going to hop right into things. And what I want to do is I'm going to give you kind of the 10,000-foot preview to start, and then I'll get into some of the details of the application. So right now I'm inside of Microsoft Dynamics, and they have what they call a role-tailored client. So I'm logged in as an accounting manager. And what I'm seeing are particular areas that are relevant to my job. So I can see things like invoices that need to get created, expense reports to be processed, any type of timesheet corrections. So each one of these stacks is like a visual cue for me, and if I want to know what's behind it, I drill into it. So I drill into the one expense report that was submitted and approved, but it says it hasn't been transferred over to AP yet. So this means accounting needs to take their step to review it. So as somebody in accounting, I can look at it, see all the details about the expense report, the project, the WBS code, the type of charge, how it was paid for. I can look at who approved it and when they approved it. So when I pop up that box, it shows me all the approvals that happened, and then also any kind of attachments. So those would be the receipts associated with it. So what you're seeing is when it comes to accessing information, a lot easier to find things because there's so much information we collect. It's become so important to make it really readily available and easy to access. Also different charts. So Microsoft's got about 20 different out-of-the-box charts you can put on your home page. As a growing government contractor, I'm sure one of the things that you guys are looking closely at is where are we at from a cash balance perspective. So you can put some details about your cash balance on there. A side note on managing bank accounts, Microsoft is also working on integration with banks. So they're tackling some of the big banks first where they can integrate some of that financial data from your bank back into your accounting system. Each one of these little boxes is configurable. So when I clicked on the gears here, it means as an end user, I can tailor it to how I want to see it. So for instance, maybe I want to show my mailboxes, and I can pick which ones that I want to show there. And then once I say OK, now my mailbox shows up. Over to the right, this is an area of the system that is specific to me from a reporting and analysis. So the things that I see at the bottom is it says My Job Queue. So My Job Queue, these are the reports that are queued up. So any type of report that I schedule, so I can run them on demand, but I can also schedule them. Say, for instance, that job status report. I want to run it and have it ready for me every Monday. So I can set up that report to be processed, and then I can tell it some different things about when the report processes. So maybe I want to have the report outputted to PDF or Word or Excel. Or I'm old school. I like to have things printed. So I can actually tell it I want to have it printed, and then where is it going to be printed to in the morning. And then finally, the recurrence at the bottom is telling me how often do I want this report to print. Maybe, like I said, it's every Monday, print that PSR, drop it on my inbox in an Excel format. Notifications at the bottom, this is the inbox that it shows up in. And then the top right-hand section, this is my job. So as a user, maybe there's a handful of different jobs or projects that they're important to me. These are my 4 top projects. I want to have them on my desktop so I can quickly get to them. If I double-click one of the records, it actually launches that job screen, and I can see the details of it here. A little later on, I'm going to show you how, like Damon said, how do you set up a job from a billing and cost collection perspective. But while I'm here, I want to touch on the status box because it's something that's a little different. And the idea here is there's information about this job that instead of running the PSR or maybe the age project receivable report, I can see it right here. I can see details about contract and funded value and revenue and AR and billings, etc. Each one of these values has detail behind it, though. So the AR balance of $8,000, when I hit that number, it takes me to what are the open invoices in this case that we haven't been paid for from the customer. If I wanted to know anything about those open invoices, so for instance, maybe the customer says, you know what, Paul, we never got that invoice. Okay, no problem. I'm actually pulling it up now, and let me email it over to you. So I can actually pull it up, email it at any time, or reprint it and send it to them if needed. In addition to that, not only just seeing the detail about the invoice, I can look at the detail in this case regarding the AR because everything is tied together and integrated. So this is telling me that that invoice, number 68, the customer still owes us $672. And if I wanted to see the detail of what got applied to the original one, maybe it was a credit or a payment, I can drill into it, and it shows me, okay, here was that applied entry for $1,000, and if I hit navigate, it's going to show me all the details regarding that application. In this case, it was a cash receipt. It hit the customer ledger, also hit the bank ledger. If I hit show on the bank ledger, it's telling me, oh yeah, we actually put that money into our Bank of America bank account. Open means we didn't reconcile the bank account yet. Maybe the check didn't clear yet. I'm not sure. But this is a way that I can start from that higher level and actually drill into the detail. Oftentimes, companies ask, what are the capabilities that Dynamics NAV provides? And if I go to the department list, this department list will give you a general idea. So it's everything from financial management, which includes the GL, cash management, cash flow, receivables, payables. For folks that have fixed assets, can also manage that. Sales order processing, purchase order management. We've got clients that have products that they either sell or make. So you can also have warehousing and manufacturing. For a lot of our clients, they're professional services, project-based businesses. So project accounting is core to what they do. Also has integrated HR and payroll, resource planning built into the application. So all those things are available as part of that base application. What you see, though, is in addition to what's here, we also have the ability for all employees to enter timesheets, expense reports, and purchase requisitions. And then we'll go through this whole workflow of how time is entered and approved and then processed through accounting. So this will be the second part of the presentation around time and expense. And then what we'll do is we'll actually get into certain types of reports. So every module has its own set of reports. We talked about the job status report earlier, job revenue summary report. This is a report that gives me details regarding, from an overall project perspective, information about revenue and cost and funding. So any of the reports, like we mentioned, you can print them, hard copy, PDF, Word, Excel, or also schedule it. I can also just run it on the fly. So when I run this report, it gives me the details of, in this case, for a certain job by task, I'm showing current period, year-to-date, inception-to-date data, also details about my funded backlog. So you'll see reports throughout the system within every module. I was in a meeting earlier in the week, and one of the executives talked about, we use Excel for certain kinds of reporting, and how can we access information from Excel? So the back end of the system is SQL Server, and we leverage two tools within SQL, one called Reporting Services and one called Analysis Services. One of the things Analysis Services allows us to do is, Analysis Services is like a data cube technology, and we can connect that data to a lot of different front ends. So we can connect it to, things like Power BI, which is an analytics tool within Office 365. You can connect it to, like Cognos, but you can also connect it to Excel. So I've got some examples of, connecting it to Excel and then actually showing some of that information more in a graphical view. In this case, I'm not typing in anything. I'm just accessing data from the accounting system and time entry. So on the project side, seeing things like an income statement by job or by task, labor reporting, cost reporting, burn rate detail. So I'll pull a couple of these up and give you a sense for how it works. So I'll drill into this hours report, and what I'm doing as a user is I'm selecting the period, project or group of projects and tasks, and it's showing me on a monthly basis how many hours have been charged across that subset of projects, tasks, and periods. The cost report is giving me information, similar idea with the slicers, but it's showing me all the cost elements, both direct costs and indirects that have been allocated to this job that I selected, showing me that monthly trend. Then the project spend report, this is giving me details about both the cost side of the equation and also the revenue included in it. So you can see top line revenue, all of my operating costs, including indirects, net income or loss, and also what was spent. So that spent value, when we select it, you can see that there's no data I keyed in here. It's just looking at that cube, showing me information about spend. And I'm going to show you later how the system, I can not only run reports, but the system can also alert me on things like, from a funding perspective, where are we at in terms of that funding being burned. And speaking of funding burn, you see that spent up top. It shows me original funding, what we've used, how much is left. Then based on the average, in this case the last 3 months, it tells me how many months of funding do we have left in the system. So really giving people, in this case via Excel, some advanced analytics. So if your users are familiar with Excel or like to use Excel, great way to connect to information. And then there's also the Excel cube. It allows me to do some ad hoc querying on the fly. So I've got a little blank sheet here, and before we get into kind of the details of how we enter data, I want to show you a little bit about how we can analyze data. So you can see the different measures that I'm tracking. So things like job budget data. My job ledger, that's my historical project data. So I've got information about AR and billings and hours and commitments. So anything I want to analyze, I can just drag and drop it into my value section, and now it's showing me what are my hours, in this case against all projects. Maybe I want to see also, what have we billed to date against these projects, and then maybe information about labor spent, and I'll mention what that is in a little bit. Now we'll go down and grab a couple other ones. unposted hours, unposted spent. And then in our rows would be how do we want to group this? So there's a lot of different ways to group things. Let's start by our contract. So this would be like an IDIQ or a BPA, so some type of GWAC. If you wanted to analyze across your contracts, in this case I'm showing all jobs of a certain type. So I chose job type of T&M, and it's showing me hours for my 3 different contracts that I got in my demo system. These hours here are the hours that have been entered in the time entry system and processed through accounting. The billing is what we've actually billed to date. The labor spent, this includes not only what we've billed, but hours that have been recorded through labor distribution, but we haven't billed them yet. So this means that we've got, in this case, 166 minus 84. We've got 82,000 more labor that we've processed in accounting, but we haven't billed it yet. And then these unposted hours are hours that are in the timesheet that haven't been put into the accounting system. And then the unposted spent, this is what we can bill on a T&M. So now I've got some, some information even before accounting processes things to see. In this case, for my contract called test, there's 178,000 we can bill this period. If I wanted to look at more information about this quick explore button allows me to drill deeper into it. So maybe I want to know, out of that 178,000, what are the details by labor category? So let's drill into this. And now what it shows me is my different labor categories on that job called test. I can see that we've got $94,000 in PM labor we can bill. So now I've got some more rich analytics. So we know that if we should be billing 100,000 in PM labor, I can know halfway through the month where I'm at. So it's not only the labor categories, but maybe instead of labor categories, we really manage things close, and we want to look at who are the people that are actually charging time, and let's look at how they're doing in terms of entering data. So let's go ahead and let's look at the people's names that are working. So let's go ahead and drill to resource name. And now here are the different people. And the thing I see is, pretty quickly I spot, I don't know who Andrew Simmons is, but he's the guy that, he's going to have some pretty significant billings this month. He might be a little overworked, right, Damon? But, $52,000 in billings for the month. Maybe what we see, though, is that there's 220 hours. We don't have 220 hours in the month. Maybe he keeps something wrong. But at least I've got that information in advance. But that's the idea here, is that it's a way that you can access information to really make great decisions and have information before you're 20 days into the next month, and now it's too late. All right, so we showed you how we got to all that exciting, cool data. Now what I want to do is show you how easy it is to enter it, because I think a lot of companies really, they promote the different reporting, but I think the challenge is some of those systems are so hard to use, that you can't even get the information into the system. All right, so Damon, I guess before we pop into a project, I think we got just a quick poll that you wanted to cover.
And we're talking about Microsoft and Microsoft products. Just a quick question out there. What products your company currently uses with Microsoft? So, and pick as many as apply. Office 365. It's been around for a couple of years now, but a lot of people are adopting it. Outlook has been around for quite a while as well. SharePoint, kind of hit or miss. I know a lot of companies do use it or implement it, and we talked about Excel, so we'll make sure that. And then there's other things as well. Looks like we're 100% on Excel, which is great. I mean, obviously people are familiar with it. I'd say about 60%.
Yeah, we'll give them 10 more seconds here. Looks like we got about 70% of the people have voted so far. Yeah. But yeah, no, it looks like a lot of users of Excel, significant also on SharePoint, Damon. I see that you've got a little over 60% of people that use SharePoint today. So, all right, excellent.
Close that.
Okay.
Send it back over to you.
So what I'll do is, since we see we've got a lot of SharePoint and Excel users, let's as we go through this, we'll talk about some of those touch points of how somebody can leverage SharePoint or Excel. So let's go ahead and let's hop right into a job, because I think that like I said, oftentimes probably 75% of our clients are project related. So let's talk a little bit about how those jobs are set up, and how you can define the billing and the detail of how we're going to capture costs and funding. So I'm on a job that I'm setting up here. So this is my internal job number. If you remembered from that little presentation we just did, and we looked at the the billings by contract, this is how the system knows what is the contract vehicle the work is being performed under. So if you have a GSA contract that you're performing work under, you can set that contract up, and now I can choose it on any work we're performing under that schedule. And I was just meeting with a company we just signed up last week, and what we did for them is they wanted to put together their IFF report for GSA. So they want to identify how much they need to pay GSA every period, because GSA, they want to get their money, right? So we basically showed them how they can identify the contract, and we put together a little report for them so they can actually automate that production of that report to identify what the fee is they need to pay GSA. So that's the primary contract number. Any other contract number, details about the contracting office and paying office related to the work being performed. Up in the general section, I'm also identifying who's the client. So this is the client the work is being performed for. This is my main functional contact at that customer. So I'm choosing from a list of all my contacts, internal PM, type of contract, period of performance. So these are some data elements that we're capturing. Any of this information that we capture, we can report on any of it. So also, one of the things that comes up quite often is people talk about, can I have user-defined fields? And absolutely. I mean, Dynamics NAV, they give you the ability to have, for each record, you could have like 1,000 for each record user-defined fields if needed. So really gives you the flexibility to capture information that's important to you. On the posting tab, this is all the financial data. So in this case, I'm on a cost type contract. You can see from up top the job contract type was CPFF. And now down below, I'm looking at details regarding, how do I recognize revenue? The billing side of it, so billing and revenue recognition, I'm defining based on the standard rules that are built into the system. I can choose which one is an option. But if I have something that's unique, you can actually create a billing formula that might be unique to your business if needed. The billing pool group, this is related to your indirects. So on a cost type contract, you recover your indirects either based on a corporate structure. So this one is set up to use my corporate rate structure, but you could have examples where the rate structure is unique to that job. So I've got an example here that says no G&A on travel. So from a cost recovery, I might not be able to recover the G&A applied to travel, even though, we still, from an allocation perspective, allocate based on total cost input. So it gives you the flexibility to bill, the way that you negotiated with the government or the way they negotiated with you. The fee percent, so on a cost type, I'm identifying recovery of that fee. I could also have fee on hours, any type of withholding. So this is like the top level for the job. Really gives you robust options in terms of how we recognize revenue and billing for really any type of contract vehicle. When I get into the work breakdown structure, a couple things to note. We'll talk about from a top level perspective. So this WBS is a 60-character alphanumeric field. Each one of these levels can be of a different type. So in this case, the main job was cost plus fixed fee, but you can see I've got a task order here that's fixed price. So each one of the tasks can be of their own task type with their own billing and revenue formula. So really, when you have complex contracts that you end up where they're a hybrid arrangement, you can handle not only the cost collection but also billing for hybrid contracts. So I want to touch a little on the WBS because this is a really important part of the setup, and it gives companies the capability to record costs and bill in a flexible manner. So when I look at the WBS here, I'm going to expand this top level one. So I've got a Dynamics NAV implementation task order. We'll talk about three elements of the WBS. So the first one is funding. So what you can see in my demo is that I've got funding at level 2, and what this means is that the funding for labor, we've got $5.8 million that's funded for labor. And because it's at this level, the charging level, this means that only that charge code can use the funding. If I had set funding at level 1, what that would mean is that any task that started with 001 could use that funding. So I could have an example where we fund $10 million for the Dynamics NAV task order. Any of these charge codes could use that $10 million. So you have that flexibility to fund at any level, and the system will restrict you from billing over whatever that level is unless you're working at risk on a particular task. The next thing we talk about is once we set up that task, and actually let me add one more thing to funding because I want to weave in, because we got a lot of SharePoint folks. One of the ways that folks use SharePoint integrated with NAV, so a standard integration there. So the example I want to talk about is if I had some type of change order. So maybe we are at the point where we need some additional funding for our labor CLIN. I'm going to go ahead and add a mod to that. This mod detail, these are all of the history of all mods. So I'm adding contract value, funded value, potentially de-obligating funds or changing the POP. So I'm going to go ahead and enter another line. We'll say this mod happened today, and we had just increased the funded value by $300K and also the contract value. Let me go ahead and type it in correctly. And now once I accept this change, you're going to see that this 19.1 and 18.9 million along with the 5.8 here are both going to go up by that 300K. So once I say OK, you can see that those numbers are automatically updated. Nothing I need to do to update them. And if I go back to that work breakdown structure and we look at it, that labor task has been updated to a little over 6 million. So all those mods are tracked in detail and rolled up to each successive level. So this is where SharePoint comes in, is that for folks that use SharePoint, there is a component that you can add on any of these pages to associate a record, or a file, I should say, with this record. So it uses, the SharePoint document management piece where I can take a file and just drag and drop it against a record. And what it does, it takes that file and puts it into SharePoint and links it back to this job. So just think about it. You get the email from the contracting officer that that funding change was approved. I can associate that document. So if it's PDF, Excel, any type of file, or I could just associate the email. So really a great way to manage those unstructured documents, relate them, because otherwise it's impossible to find the stuff. People have to go back and find the email, or where is that document located? Now I have a way to really manage documents associated with records in the accounting system and have it be easy for an end user to do it. All right, so let's go back to that WBS. That's a little bit about how I manage funding. Any of those levels can be associated with an ACRN or CLIN. The next thing we want to talk a little bit about is this visibility control. And what this is doing is telling the system any of these charge levels, what type of charge is it? Is it a charge code for time or labor, or is it a charge code that can be used for expenses, requisitions, or POs? It could be both. It could be neither. Like you can see that I can't charge this top level, so I don't make it available to people. So nobody is going to charge to this level 1. They've got to charge down to this level 2. Membership is how the system identifies who can see the charge codes. You can set up teams or groups, and then you assign people to that group, and that's how the system knows that people can charge during, in this case, whatever the period of performance is. So if I look at this labor task, and I go to the task detail here, you can see that this is a 3-year task from Jan 1 of 2015 through December 31st. But if I go to this membership, everybody that doesn't have a visible date, they can see it during that period of performance. But in this case, Johnny Walker, he could only see it for 15 days in March. So you can restrict things beyond whatever the period of performance is. So the period of performance will restrict time and expense, but I could also restrict it at an individual level. And then the third thing is around the hierarchies for approval. So you've got unlimited hierarchy for time, expense, and requisition, and as a company you can define it either as an organizational hierarchy or a project-specific hierarchy for approving. All right, so that's some general things about setting up a project, in this case a cost-type project. I'm going to touch briefly on a little bit on the budgeting side, and like Dan mentioned, today is for overview. So if you have detailed questions, you can go ahead and ask them, but we're also happy to have a presentation that's specific to your business if needed. So on the budgeting side, this is the place that I can build my project budget. The system has both project and corporate budgets, and you can, in essence, link the two. So I can take and do a bottoms-up where I build all my project budgets and copy them over to my corporate budget. But this is the place that I can identify, by resource, how many hours we've budgeted. The system has some features to help make it easier, so things like copy features, where I could create a 1-month budget, then copy that budget out over multiple months. Each resource or employee or subcontractor, they can have their own working calendar, and what that allows you to do is identify the number of hours that are available to bill for that person in the period. And by doing that, once you set up that working calendar, if I identify the, how many hours, in this case, Andrew is going to work in May, I can copy that ratio out over multiple months. So if he's going to be a 0.5 FTE, I can copy it out over those multiple months. Same idea with ODCs, but if you didn't want to use some of the copy features there, you could also use that import, export from Excel. And like Dan mentioned, I guess we had a pretty significant group, almost 100% that were using Excel. So really big group there that does that. So a little bit about the budgeting and forecasting. Regarding funding limits, we talked about that top level of funding, which is, hey, I get funding in terms of the total dollar value of funding. You can also, these are other funding limits. The way to think about it is it's a cap. I can't bill over whatever the overall funded value is, but I could also cap the funded fee. I could cap maybe materials or travel. So any type of, we call them categories, you can cap it. So cap travel, subcontract, labor. I could cap my G&A on a particular task. So this allows you to prevent, from billing over whatever these caps are. So oftentimes I've seen companies that when they have caps, they do them manually because the system can't support it. So this can support that idea of capping things and not billing over those caps there. And then the last piece I'm going to talk about on this job is I want to talk about alerts. So if you remembered earlier when we were in that Excel dashboard view, we showed that funding, we had X months of funding left. Well, this is another tool to help you manage funding, and what this does is it allows me at any level of WBS to compare what's been spent or billed to what's been budgeted or funded. So billing is just billing, everybody knows that. We talked about funding and budgeting, and then spent, we mentioned this earlier. The idea of spent is when you've recorded costs that are going to be billed, so on a T&M or a cost-type project, you've actually spent that funding. So this allows me to look at billings before it happens. And then you tell the system at what % do I want to notify people. So you can have a first alert, a second alert, in this case a third alert. And then you identify who gets the alert. It's the PM that gets it, task manager, or I could just hand key an email address in there. And then each night the system validates, was the condition met? If it was, sends out that email to folks that are assigned to that project. All right, so that's we talked a little bit about a cost type project. I want to touch on a T&M one before we go to capturing time and expense. So the reason I want to go to the T&M one is there's some differences on T&M. I won't go through the other setups, but the main difference is around how you bill that project. So in this case, instead of billing it based on cost type scenarios, I'm billing it based on my T&M labor rates. So in my demo system, I've got for job 2025, that's the job that I'm on right here, by labor category code. So you can see my labor category code, the effective date, and then the bill amount. So I'm going to just highlight 2 lines and talk a little bit about how this is different than some systems. So what you're seeing is my consultant 1 labor category starting Jan 1 of 2016 billed at 144, and then in Jan of 2017 it's going to escalate to 151. So I can put in my future bill rates, the system based on the day that someone, the date they entered into on their timesheet, it'll know what the proper bill rate is. So I don't need to worry about, changing the labor category or going in and changing the labor rate. I can set it up one time. The system will automatically choose the proper bill rate there. The second thing about this is the effective date of when the change happens can be any date. It doesn't need to be the first of the month. It doesn't need to be the beginning of your timesheet period. It can be any day within the month. So it helps when you have T&M rate changes that happen in the middle of a timesheet period. Still helps you to automate that stuff. The next thing is, once I've defined what the bill rates are, I'm telling the system what labor category codes are people working under on this job. So the corporate labor category might be different than the person's project labor category. So you can see that in this case they've got Julie Fisher. She's the consultant 1, and the consultant 1, if I go back to my resource prices, right now consultant 1 is billing at 144.74. These prices, we mentioned earlier this idea of setting up a contract, and maybe you have a GSA contract. You can actually have that contract pricing and copy it into the project. So if I start with my GSA pricing, I can copy it into here, and what it does, it creates my list of prices for this job. If in your scenario, your GSA pricing, maybe you're offering a discount off the GSA pricing because this contract is critical. We're getting into a new agency, and we want to win this business. So we're telling the customer that from our GSA prices, the consultant 1 labor category, we're going to offer you a discount off of that. One of the things that I can do is I can send this data off to Excel. So I just hit Control-E, or I can use this Send to Excel feature. And what it does, it takes that data from NAV, sends it off to Excel. So now I'm operating in Excel, and maybe what I want to do is I want to say that we're going to give you a 3% discount off of our GSA labor rate. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to do the math here and say that it's our GSA rate times 0.97, and then we're going to copy this down here. And then I'm going to also use Excel to say that we want this to the nearest penny. And then what I can actually do is I can take that data, and I'm going to remove my current prices. You can see the old prices in here. And go ahead and remove these. And let's go back in and tell the system, okay, I want to use this new pricing. We told them we're going to give them that 3% discount. I'm going to go ahead and copy these entries. I'm going to go back to that same screen. I'm just going to right-click. I'm going to say paste those rows in there. So, in the past, people would have to, hand key things in, or I got to remember on January 1st of 2021, I need to go in and update that T&M labor rate. Well, we take the thinking out of it, automate it, make it easier for people. All right, so that's a little bit about, for folks that use Excel, just one of the examples of how we can leverage Excel, and there's obviously many more as part of the application. All right, so now we've collected those time and or we haven't collected time and expense. Let's go ahead and collect the time and expense and talk a little bit about billing, and then we'll cover any questions. So time and expense, the first thing to note is it's all fully integrated. So there is no synchronization between the accounting system and the time entry system. That's one of the questions people always ask me is, okay, once I created the WBS and I created those assignments, what do I do to synchronize it with the timesheet? And the answer, which is surprising them, is nothing. Happens automatically, happens in real time. So there is no, there is no synchronization I need to do or process or copy and paste. It's all automated. So these systems are all fully integrated. You've got one database that runs the whole thing. So as an end user, some of the things I can do is I can look up my PTO balance. I can request time off, so I can go through the whole request workflow. You can set up favorites on your timesheet. So these are the projects that are charged to on a regular basis. I can only see the ones that are available to me, so it helps to prevent errors there. And then I'm just going to the day that I worked. I'm entering my hours. If I need to enter a comment, I can do that. I save it, submit it. That's my daily workflow that I go through. So very streamlined, easy for people to learn. I think that's what makes it really compelling to companies. As an expense entry person, I can also enter expenses. These expenses can be traveling based on per diem, or maybe I've got just other type of expenses. I'm going to show you real quick how I do it and how easy it is. So let's go ahead and we'll say that I traveled the first week of May. Let's say what I did. So this was travel to client. I click Save, creates my expense header for me here. And then I either add lines to my expense report, or I can use my per diem wizard. This is where I'm going to tell the system that, where did I go to? So I don't want to go to Afghanistan. Let's say we went to Alabama. That seems a little safer these days. And then where did I go in Alabama? What's the county? I can type in these data entry forms, or I could just hit the drop down, choose the period I was in that location. So I might have gone to a couple spots. We'll just keep it simple, and I went to one. And then from here, I'm going to choose what was the job. So we'll choose a Project Kempster job, put it against travel, and then from here, we'll say that lodging hits my lodging code, and meals go against per diem. I click Next. It shows me that grid, and then I would enter my actual room rate, what the tax was, click Finish, and now I just created my expense report. So that's simple and easy to do. If I had any type of attachments, I'd hit my attachment button. It would pop up my attachment. And then once I finish, I just go ahead and submit it, and then this would trigger that workflow out there for approval. So, very easy for a user to do it. And the thing that I think is pretty neat is for accounting people, I don't know if we usually have a lot of accountants on the line, is that if I can spell expense, that would help. When I go to my list of expense reports, we go down to the bottom, what you'll see is that expense report that I just created automatically in the system. Nothing I need to do, to process it. There's controls in place that I can't turn it into a payable until it gets approved. So if I need to know who approves it, okay, Sam Adams got notified today at 12:49, and we're waiting for Sam to make that approval. So really easy for not only the end user to enter it, but also it streamlines all those requirements for accounting. All right, so before we get to billing, so we're going to go through indirects and billing next. The thing I'd like to know is, do we have a poll about what systems people are using, Damon?
Yeah, I do. I'll launch this up here real quick for the poll. So, just trying to find out what sort of accounting solutions people are currently operating as they're looking around at our system and probably other systems as well. And I see Delta GCS took an early lead here. We do know that there's a lot of folks on GCS that are being asked to upgrade to cost point, and we've had a lot of folks coming to us to, take a look at the system, knowing that they have to do a new implementation.
Yeah. And we're coming up on 100 GCS migrations that we've done. So maybe we'll have a little special thing for the 100th one.
Party.
Yeah, but it looks like we've got about 8% on cost point, over 50% on GCS, about 15 to 20 on QuickBooks, and right now 17% with other. So, all right, well, that's great to know, and that's going to lead us into the next step when we talk about generating invoices. Actually, before we go to invoices, let's go to indirect rates. So we'll touch on indirect rates real quick, and then we'll go to generating the invoice. So let's go to cost pool setup. So for any folks that have cost type work, obviously this is critical. For folks that don't, oftentimes I see that they still want to manage indirects so they can get a true picture of profitability, and they might have cost type work in the future. All right, so there's really 4 steps to setting this up. Again, I think what you'll see is, very powerful, but also very straightforward in terms of how it's done. So step 1 to the setup is you're just telling the system, what is my rate structure? And this is both, my intermediate and final pools that are defined in here. The second step is, once I define my structure, and I should say the only requirement of defining the structure is that the sequence number here, this tells the system the order that it goes in. And since I know we've got a lot of GCS folks, what I want to mention is the reason for the sequence is you run the allocations one time. I don't run it for each pool. What I do is I run my allocations, and it goes from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 in my demo example. The reason why that's important is in my demo example, my fringe, once it's calculated, a portion goes out to projects, and then a portion goes to my 2 overheads, and a portion goes to G&A. In that sense, my fringe needs to be above it because that calculation impacts these other pools. So that's step 1, is I define my rate structure. Step 2 is for each one of these pools, I need to go in and tell the system, how does that rate get calculated? So with GCS, you tag the rate to the account. With this system, you define what accounts are accumulated for that rate. And that's why this system doesn't have any limitation in terms of the number of pools. So I can have as many pools as I want. I can have as many by division. There is no restriction there. So I'm just telling the system in this case, my overhead client site pool, I'm accumulating all the costs that are in my overhead account range, which is account 7,000 through 7,700. And this account number is a 20-character field, but you don't need to build the project and department structure into it. We can't cover that for today, but again, a way to give you flexibility from a reporting perspective and also overall financial management. So I'm telling the system what accounts, what group of departments, and then I do the same concept for the base. So in this case, my base is my direct labor for those departments with my fringe applied. My fringe is applied based on actual costs there. So that's step 2 is I'm telling the system, for each one of these pools, how does the rate get calculated? Then my third step is I'm telling the system, once I accumulate that cost, what do I do with it? In my example here, I'm taking that loaded rate and I'm allocating it out to projects at an actual rate and also a provisional rate. So actual is easy. I accumulate those costs in my pool, my base, you do the math, and it calculates a rate, and then we take that rate and multiply it for each job, that this pool is participating in. I'm going to give it a portion of that overhead, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. And then the provisional rate, what it's doing is it's taken whatever that base is, and it's multiplying it by the provisional rate that's set up for that particular pool. This is date sensitive also. So I've got the effective date for the pool, my provisional rate, also final rate. I actually learned something recently. I didn't realize this, but one of the things that we offer is the ability, when you plug that final rate in, we can do invoicing based on final rate. So you don't need to do that offline. Once you get that final rate, you can go to the invoice worksheet, and I'll show you when we do invoicing, there's a spot to say, do this based on final rate. And the system will produce the invoice. If you do it on an invoice, if it's going to be a credit, if your provisional rates are lower, you go to the sales credit, and it'll produce a credit memo for you. So I don't need to do the calculation. The system does it for me. But that's how you set up the rate structure. And then what you're doing is each month, typically people are doing their allocations monthly. They go in, they run the function called allocate cost. They choose the period, whether they're using final rate or not. The system makes the allocations for you. So it's going to hit both the general ledger and the project ledger. And this gives us a good chance to actually go over to the general ledger. And I want to show the folks on the phone, what does that look like? So you can see I've got down below, I've got a range of all my allocation accounts. And what you're going to do is you're going to have, for each one of those pools, I actually end up with 4 allocation accounts. So I've accumulated my overhead costs above, and now the distribution of it, in this case, I've got my overhead to projects company site based on actual rates, then also based on provisional rates. You can see I've got significant variance here. When I drill into it, it shows me all the details. So it shows me each allocation that was made by job and task combination, and then it shows me what was that base, what was the rate, how much got allocated. So I actually see the details, the math in that allocation. Very streamlined process, can handle all sorts of complex allocations. I've seen some interesting ones from clients throughout the years. All right, so now last step, and I want to make sure we get things out on time, is the invoicing process. So to generate an invoice, actually, I'm going to go over to this job because I've got an invoice worksheet in there. So to create the invoice, I would just run the function, choose the job I'm going to run it for. Didn't go through this concept of billing group, but what billing group allows me to do is if I have, say, 20 tasks on a particular job, I can group ones together and create groups of invoices. The period I'm going to run it for, if it's using the final rate, if it's a cost type invoice, I would check this and then identify final rate from what period, and then I say OK, or I could schedule it, and what it does, it creates an invoice worksheet. And I wanted to pick one that I had an invoice worksheet for because I want to talk also about this send approval request. So this one's a T&M one. When I go to print it, I can print in a couple different ways. So category group means, we talked earlier about types of expenses, so direct labor, ODCs, travel, etc. So group it by category means that. Category group plus labor type, what this does is it splits out my direct labor from my subcontract labor. The labor itself, by resource means print the person's name in the labor category. By labor category, groups all the labor categories together and doesn't show the person's name. You can mix and match these things and also tell it, in this case, I want to print it this way this time, maybe a different way next time. Whether I print inception and date, how do I roll it up? I won't go through all the details to save a little bit of time. Oops, I just closed it by accident. So let me go ahead and reopen it. Hit the right button this time and make it a little bit bigger. And now you're seeing details regarding, contract information, funding information. In this case, I'm showing my direct labor split out from consultant because I chose by labor type, current period data, inception and date data, any withholding, etc. And just because an invoice is just a report, I can also export it to Excel, PDF, and Word. And where I wanted to go with this is we also have the ability to send approval requests. And what this does, it takes that document and it emails it out to whoever the PM is, and it uses SharePoint's approval workflow, as a way to identify who approves it. They get the email, it puts the document into SharePoint, and allows them to go through that whole approval process. So I know we covered a lot today, and we're actually at 1 o'clock exactly, and I don't want to go over. I know people, we just took up your lunch hour, but hopefully you still enjoyed lunch while you were listening. We appreciate your time. There was a bunch of questions, and I think what we'll do is we'll follow up with a folks that had questions. And we'll also, Damon, I guess if we can reach out to them, and if they didn't know how to put questions in, we can just email them
We'll follow
and
up.
just answer any questions you might have. But I want to say thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I think it might even have stopped raining, so you can go out and enjoy the afternoon. So have a wonderful day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Take care.